She's liked by the diplomatic corps. She's really liked by them.
Okay, so good afternoon, colleagues. It's an absolute pleasure to have you join us here today for this Guyana Business Journal Building Tomorrow's Future Today critical analysis of Guyana's Energy Conference 2026. I should say at the outset that this webinar is sponsored. We finally found someone to uh, step up and offer some sponsorship by Metallica Commodities Corp. And note that for over 2 decades, MCC has operated at the intersection of natural resource extraction and global logistics, trading in non-ferrous metals, copper, lead, zinc, nickel, cobalt, gold, and other precious metals across continents, with representative offices in Peru, Canada, Tanzania, and Guyana. And I think MCC has witnessed firsthand how institutional quality really determines whether resource revenues generate broad-based prosperity or concentrated advantage. Uh, the company's experience in jurisdictions where oil and mineral wealth have transformed budgets, sometimes strengthening democratic governance, sometimes undermining it, shapes its understanding, I think, of the necessity for critical conversations. And I think they recognize that the frameworks for governing how unprecedented revenues are debated, allocated, overseen, will shape outcomes for decades. And so we're very grateful for their support of these critical institutional questions. Let me be crystal clear. The webinar is sponsored by MCC. It's not being done on behalf of MCC. The views expressed are those of the Guyana Business Journal, and MCC, to their credit, has not seen fit to interfere with the editorial prerogatives of the Guyana Business Journal. So let's just take a short moment to introduce our partnership with MCC.
Metallica Commodities, a global leader in non-ferrous metals trading since 2001. From our headquarters in New York to operations across the Americas, Africa, and Asia, we connect producers and consumers worldwide. Specializing in copper, zinc, gold, and precious metals concentrates. With offices in Guyana, Peru, Canada, and Tanzania, we deliver expertise, reliability, and sustainable solutions. Metallica Commodities, global reach, trusted partner.
Well, thank you once again, MCC. I am Terrence Blackman, professor and chair, Department of Mathematics at Medgar Evers College, City University of New York, and the publisher of our Guyana Business Journal. And tonight we're going to do something a little different. Instead of celebrating Guyana's upcoming energy conference scheduled for tomorrow, February 17th through 20th, we're going to examine it critically. Some of the key points. The 2026 conference promises 10,000 attendees, 20,000 exhibit, 200 plus exhibitors, speakers including President Ali and regional heads of state. And the theme is sort of building tomorrow's future today. And we wanted to explore this theme within the context of Guyana. This is the 5th edition of the Energy Conference, and last year's drew participants from over 40 countries. It has become the Caribbean's premier energy and investment forum. But here's the question that we're asking tonight. Is the conference genuinely building Guyana's energy future? Or is it building something else entirely? Is it policy or is it theater? Is it governance or is it spectacle? And tonight I have with me none other than Dr. Vincent Adams, the former head of the EPA under the APNU AFC government, with decades of experience in the US Department of Energy, one of Guyana's most credentialed energy and environmental professionals, and someone who is committed to speaking truth, regardless of political convenience. Dr. Adams, thank you for joining us. I know that you've reviewed the conference perspective, and let me start with a simple question. What was your reaction?
Yeah, I like how you talk about it being simple. I guess simple is a relative. It's a relative term. But thanks for having me, Terence, and good night to or good evening to our wonderful listeners. But I just wanna to say here, Terence, that just to reiterate what you said, this is not to give the impression that we are against the conference. I think the reason why we're here is because we are in favor of such a conference. It is a necessity. Guyana is now the become a big kid on the block when it comes to oil and gas. It's That's the face of Guyana. So this conference is absolutely necessary. However, if we're going to showcase Guyana, we've got to showcase it in the right light and not just as a showpiece for other reasons. But anyway, so here's what my first take on what I see. For it's and this year has been what the fifth year, and it seems to be the same old, except for for a different day. Beautiful graphics, great presenters and participants, expensive expensive sponsorship package. I mean, you mentioned, what is it, 10,000? They're expecting like 10,000 participants. Is that, and
Yeah,
200 exhibits?
yeah,
But here is the reality, folks. Um, well, and this is not being political. This year, we speak in the interest of what's best for Guyana. All of these 10,000 participants, and they're kings and princes from all over the world, leaders of all kinds of countries from all over the planet. They're ministers. I, I'm sure that there are at least 10 high-powered ministers who are going to be in this conference, including the President Ali. However, it is striking and very noticeable that not a single member of the opposition was invited to this conference. And this is not political. This, and especially with the theme of the conference, building tomorrow's future today. Now, I thought that the member of parliament, the entire all of the opposition was part, by constitution, by the way, is part of that government that would be building this future today. But none of them, even though a lot of foreigners were invited, not a single one of them were invited. And it's not a case where this was not brought to the attention. Several years ago, I remember I brought it to the attention publicly, and could not believe the government response was that there are no qualified people in the government. Which was I mean, it was an amazing response. But anyway, the other thing is, Terence, is when you look at the participants, especially, you talk about numbers again in terms of the participants, but what is the price to get in?
mm,
This whole thing, oil and gas and local content is to build the expertise and to build small businesses in Ghana. Those small businesses cannot afford, when you're looking at, what is it, like the numbers that I saw was, for a small business, is like 4,600 US dollars, and then you got transportation and hotels and everything. It's probably coming up to $1 to $2 million for each business. They just the ordinary citizen, the John public who would like to come and attend and listen and learn. I think that's 400 US dollars. So those are the kinds of things that, in terms of participation, which should be very important, that the broad sector of Guyana's populace and businesses should be involved in this conference, but they're basically locked out or priced out. So we've got a conference that does not have participants from the local community, which is to me counter to the whole intent of such a very important and critical conference. So I know we're going to get into some more details, Jan, but so that's my initial take on it.
So on this theme of building tomorrow's future today, uh, what does it commit the conference to? I think what you're saying there is that if you're going to build tomorrow's future today, who are you building tomorrow's future with? And if you can't bring the one significant part of the government to this process, then who is this future being built for?
Yeah.
you know, you know, uh, you know, one of the other things I want to ask, I mean, just is it too vague to have, you know, everyone can claim, in a sense, the theme itself is part of the problem, right? It's vague enough that, you know, everyone can claim some alignment to it without committing to anything specific. You know,
Yes, absolutely, and the theme is very interesting. Of course, you can tell it's those are like a lot of political catchword. It's to me, it's propagandistic marketing language, and it's not policy language. The first question you're gonna ask again: whose future is it building tomorrow's future today? Whose future they're really building? Look who are the people who are setting the agenda and deciding upon the future, going back to who are participating. That you would expect that would be the participants. But if you have participants who are only the sponsors, like for example, Exxon, you know the numbers better than I do. I think they, what is it, a platinum sponsor or something, 150,000. I'm
yeah.
sure probably Chevron is probably doing the same, and others. But who is setting that agenda for tomorrow? Except that it is being set by these major companies.
But
So
let me let
are
me
we
ask you a
really
question.
looking at, go ahead.
Looking at the conference topics, AI in oil and gas, supply chain resilience, digital transformation, carbon capture. I mean, these sound like cutting edge things. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, well, you see, the problem. Well, it's not a problem really. All of that sounds good, but it's just like if we're putting the horse before the cart or the cart before the horse, because we have not even taken care of the basic issues that we're talking about. Like what's really is the regular Guyanese interest, and what are their future? Their dilemma right now is what they're interested in. 60% of or 58% of Guyana, based on reports, live in poverty. We've got corruption at the highest level. Child malnutrition is very high. So who is really setting the future agenda? These companies, they're basically setting a conference. They're setting up the agenda, and they do not want anything on that agenda that is not totally or almost totally in their interest. And so that is what you know things such as, for example, um, for them, their interest or their future, this is the companies, is to pump as much oil as possible, make as much profit as possible, and as quickly and as possible. And while the people at the same time are not getting to participate, making the decisions at conferences such as these, and their interests are not satisfied. So when they talk about AI and all this, people, it sounds good to people, but people want the bread and butter. Their interest is in the bread and butter. How much of this money is coming down to us? And right now, like I said, we still have 58% of the people living in poverty. They're not seeing anything. So that is what the people want to know. Well, why? What is that agenda to improve things for me? What has happened? One of the critical issues here, Terence, is we've seen other countries. People are asking these questions on every single day. Would we ever get? Are we going to turn like Venezuela? Are we going to turn like Nigeria? With a resource course where we produce all of this oil after 20 or 30 years, when oil is gone, we're worse off in terms of poverty than we are before. And that is not what is addressed in this conference. People are not being educated or understand what is going on. There's no transparency whatsoever. That's what this conference should have been serving as, is to bring in independent and trustworthy export voices that people would trust internationally, because we know Guyana is more driven by politics more than anything else. And that's very much missing from this conference.
I hear you. I think what you're saying is that there's nothing really wrong in terms of just in a literal sense with discussing advanced technology, but in a sense we haven't mastered the basics yet. And
That's right. Yep,
yeah,
yep, yeah.
yeah,
We are we like we're putting stuff on autopilots on autopilot without even learning to steer as yet.
yeah. And certainly, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, certainly, you know, do we have some functioning, like energy regulatory committee? Do we have, on the flip side, I read someplace, do we have like, real time, production data? So maybe aspects of this could be premature and performative rather than more a signal to international investors that, look, we're an advanced place, but this is not a signal to the Guyanese public about how well we're managing this resource in your interest, how well we're being stewards of this research in your interest. I want to go, since you're since you've raised this issue. You've been in the energy sector for decades. If you were designing a conference that says building tomorrow's future today, what specifically would be on the agenda that isn't currently there?
Yeah, that would take us a few days to get through, but here's some basics. The first thing, and which is severely lacking in Guyana, again, these conferences, Terence, these conferences, especially in a new country like Guyana that is so limited in its resources, is to share lessons learned and experiences, bad, good, and indifferent, that what has been successful, what has been pitfalls, which has happened throughout the world. We've got oil and gas is not new to the world; it's new to Guyana. So here's this conference, rather than us going and repeating the same mistakes of the past and not getting an opportunity to see the best practices. That's what this conference is supposed to be. So then to build, by the way, so that for us to be able to build that capacity to manage it, you get that knowledge to build capacity. So the first thing, one of the, my fundamental, requirement of all, as you go through these, as you structure an organization, is capacity building. And you touched on it. The regulatory commission, for example, it has to be independent. Of course, everything is so politicized. The EPA, for example, the EPA does not, believe it or not, the EPA gives the authorization for operating oil and gas offshore. The EPA does not have a single person, not a single person at that organization with even 5 minutes of training in petroleum engineering or petroleum science or anything to do with petroleum. And that was one of the things that I'm not, I don't want to go back to politics, because when I was there, that's the one thing that I worked with the World Bank to make sure happened. We were setting up a petroleum unit there to bring in high-powered petroleum exports, and it was canceled when the administration changed. University of Guyana. I don't even see the University of Guyana participating in this conference. The University of Guyana should have been a focal point in this conference, even if it's to build capacity, and let them be part of it, because that's the institution that you should be leaning on to develop the skills and that foundation. I don't see any major participation, if any at all. Maybe I didn't recognize some names, but I don't see any major participation in the conference. We had also set up a petroleum engineering department at the University of Guyana, piggybacking on the University of West Indies and University of Trinidad and Tobago, which are mature programs. That has been canceled. So capacity building is a major the other thing is, and I think you touch on it too, how to develop a safe and environmentally sound culture in these operations. That's every single conference, engineering and otherwise, you go to anything to do with engineering all over the world. The most important topic is, how do you develop a safe and environmentally sound culture? Because here's what can happen, Terence. If and we right on the edge, because as I've said over and over, this operation is operating above the safe limits that is already in law and developed through the environmental impact assessment, which is the Bible that you do not ever go against it. But they're exceeding it, which is putting the whole country in the Caribbean at risk for an oil spill. So how do you this is a topic that should have been discussed. What are the experiences that other people have learned? What are the risks of doing these type of things? And what are the consequences, and how do you mitigate against it in planning? Decommissioning, Terence.
So I just wanted to, I'm adding, so from the audience, so there was some issues there about Venezuela having impact on, the recent sort of things happening in Venezuela with regard to Trump administration. Certainly I would think that would be a reasonable thing to be on a conference agenda. So I'm just adding it there.
Yeah.
And
you want me to answer the question there, or
just... Yeah, you can certainly reflect on that. I'm just sliding them over so you can use.
Of course, nobody knows where that will, where that is heading right now. There are lots of questions as to where it's going to end. But it's of course driven by the administration in the U.S. and so let's. I would park that thought there for a minute and not worry about that aspect, because there's so many unknowns but it will be a player in terms of the economics. If you want, my personal prediction is that what it's going to do is going to impact our economics, because my prediction is that Mr. Trump, one of his highest priorities is to lower oil prices and to produce, as his policy is to pump as much as possible. Just pump baby pump, drill baby drill. And Venezuela, they've already put in a few 100,000 barrels of oil on top of what they were producing, the limited amount. On top of that, when the Ukraine war will be over, hopefully very soon, Russia oil will get to the market. So with Venezuela oil in the market, Ukraine oil in the market, guess what's going to happen? We will have an oil glut, and that would be satisfying America's interest in getting oil prices down, which means that our prices will also fall, which is also should be part of that planning, the sovereign wealth fund and everything else that we're going to get into later. But yes, I don't want to get ahead of myself, because there's still some political things that are playing out there. But what I can see in terms of the economics, yes, Venezuela will impact us, because they've already started putting a lot of oil in the market that will drive oil prices down.
So this question from James Anthony is not, it seems like a technical one, but it's an interesting technical question. So first I want to ask, is it true that reinjection of produced gas is potentially bringing on the early decline of oil and reducing in the failure of producing wells and creating safety and environmental risks, thereby depriving the government of Guyana of a potential revenue source. And then the second part of this says, you know, when you know when will the operator be compelled to advance projects such as the LNG projects, and on what time scale? So the first part, is it true that this could be an effective reinjection, and then is it actually happening in the context of Guyana?
No, the real it's the opposite. Reinjection does not decline oil production. You reinject gases here again, and I mean we need an entire different an entire conference to talk about this whole gas flaring and reinjection. The environmental impact assessment says, and the permit says, you must re-inject that gas into the reservoir from whence it came. Now, when you re-inject gas, what it does, it keeps the pressure of the reservoir up, so it helps production instead of declining production. But what has happened is what they're doing, instead of re-injecting the gas and re-injecting the produced water also, by the way, because when you bring up a barrel of oil, every barrel of oil you bring up, it comes up with about one close to 1,500 standard cubic feet of gas. It's a lot. They're filling a big room because the pressure decreases but every barrel, that small barrel, that's the amount of gas that you have in it. So you could just do your little math that at 1 million barrels per day, you multiply that by 15,000 cubic feet of gas. That's the amount of gas. It's a humongous amount of gas. So the gas to energy project, and why I say that, the gas to energy project is going to only require about 50 to 100, 100 million cubic feet per day. So it's a very small amount. So it has no impact on that. But there's the other issues, of course, that gas does, which is violating the EIA, because flaring was prohibited when, for example, when I was there at EPA, it was totally prohibited unless in cases of emergency and those type of things. Now it's ridiculous what we're doing. We're flaring, and you can flare as much gas as you want without any limit, as long as you pay a paltry little fine, which is puts the environmental the whole environmental principle of protecting the environment on its head. Because that gas that is flared in the air, instead of re-injecting it in accordance with the law, by the way, injecting the gas and the water, it has over 200 contaminants, toxic chemicals in that gas, and it goes up there, it forms acid rain that falls down back and damage the entire environment, water, and everything else. But here's the thing that they're doing, Terence, and with the question, what they're doing, instead of re-injecting the water that came out of the reservoir and the gas that came out of the reservoir back in the reservoir to maintain that pressure, to maintain production. Guess what they're doing? They're going the unenvironmentally friendly route and the cheaper route of re-injecting clean water from the ocean. You got to inject something. So instead of re-injecting what is produced, which is the normal practice, they're dumping that in the air and dumping that produced toxic, radioactive, hot water into the ocean, while they're using that clean water. And when they use that clean water, because they got to suck it, so they're sucking, and this is in the EIA, millions of eggs, fish eggs, are being damaged all the time. Millions, I'm talking about millions. On top of that, the oil and the toxic water is damaging ecological and fish life all over the place. And those are the kinds of things, again, since we raised the question, those are the kinds of studies that are being carried out throughout the world that should have been in this conference.
I mean, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I would think that there would be some small group that is studying the impact on
That's
the
right.
reduction of water, on the environment, on the marine life, and so whose office does that fall under? Why? I mean, is that just like you can just do that without
That's
without.
the EPA. That's the EPA. When one of the things that the EPA and I had started doing that, but 2020, as you recall, was we didn't have a budget in 2020. So 2020, I arrived in at the end of 2018. 2019, we did a whole lot. 2020, in our 2020 budget, one of the main things that we're going to do is to do a baseline study as to what exists out there, which means you're going out there. So now that when you do the baseline, then you can go and say, well, okay, do your modeling, because you have to do your baseline to fit into your model. Then you do your modeling to see how the impact, how the spills would be impacted. Now in the EIA, all of the EIAs for each project has, and it shows you, for example, for an oil spill, depending on the size of an oil spill, where that oil will flow to the plume. And trust me, and that is why we keep talking about this oil spill and the dangers of it without any liability from the company to cover it. So here's where this oil would go. The oil would wash away the entire Trinidad, from north to south, that eastern coast, the entire Venezuelan coast, and all of the Caribbean all the way to Jamaica. So that's where the oil will go if we get an oil spill. So those are the kinds of things that we should be studying. And how do you respond to it immediately? Our response plan is nothing. It is not a plan. I refuse to sign off on a emergency response plan. If we get a problem, if we get a spill, we're in some serious trouble. But Terence, that's the kind of thing that should have been
I mean,
be discussed in
I want to ask this
in this
I
conference.
don't know the answer to this question, but like, within the context of a PSA, wouldn't there be some kind of like requirement for, funding of this kind of, environmental kind of mitigation aspect or going along? I mean, it just seems to me like that's such a basic thing. Why is that, like, we're talking about that now in 2026, as if it's not being done? Like, that seems to me to be number one on your list. Like, if you're going to put water, you can't suck up the water from the ocean and impact the marine life. If we're going to have there's a potential spill, well, we have some sense of what the geography of that spill will look like, and there's a well-defined plan with resources for it and so on. Is that too cost prohibitive for?
No, it's not. It all it is to get an export company, and I don't know what the price is, but it is like, for example, like I told you, what we're going to be doing was to do that baseline study. It was totally affordable. We had the money in the budget to do that baseline study, and a baseline study is no different to doing any type of study in terms of, okay, even the EIA has some mitigative action. So it's not, all you got to do is run it in your models. And again, Terence, these things have happened before. So we've got actual data that you feed into these models and see how, how they work. But we do not, Terence, if we do not have a single person at the EPA who has not even a single minute of training in this area, I mean, what else do you expect? That is whereas, and again, this is not to brag about myself. It was just routine for me because I worked with the U.S. government, and that's the way that we did things. We made certain on our side. Our mantra was to make sure that we always had more firepower in terms of expertise than the contractor. And we always made certain that we had staff on the site 24/7. It was the complete opposite with this current government. And you know what's ironic about all of this that we're talking about in terms of the necessity of having these things discussed at the conference, and is you would think that if I was on the government side, this here would have been good cover for me. Because if I've got the Terence Blackmons and the rest of the experts in the world coming to this conference and saying, hey, you know what, we think that this is what should be done, that would be providing a cover for me if I'm the government not wanting to face Exxon, then I could tell Exxon, I say, well, here what our exports are saying, don't, you can't put me in that bind here where I can go against them. But that's not what's happening. We kowtowing to these major companies that are looking after their interests, and we're sitting back and just let it go. But that's what a conference like this should have been doing, Terence, is to discuss these issues that are not being discussed. As a matter of fact, it's being pushed, deliberately pushed under the rug, and have a conference that is just, fancy lights and bright lights and parties every night, with eats and drinks and everybody having fun. And that's where the deals are made, by the way, by those who can afford to go to these conferences. And the ordinary small business person cannot get the opportunity to rub shoulders with these folks. So that's the dilemma that we're in.
Yeah, but that's a very challenging situation for us to find ourselves in, and it seems so sort of from a distance. It seems so obvious that uh, at the end of the day, we're working with a finite resource. We have a number of models of places that have had exactly the same experience. We're a relatively small country. We're 800,000 people. Uh, it should not have been so difficult. Uh, I want to, just thinking about something else that is there. It's this question of the local content requirements. And, I know that I know that we have a local content act that sets kind of, you know, targets for, Guyanese ownership, employment. How do you feel like the local content thing is working, and is it doing the job that it's supposed to do?
Nope, nope, it's not. Look, a local content policy and act is supposed to target Guyanese entrepreneurs, workers, to employment, training. Um, and but there's no unless there's some reporting that we're not seeing, but there are no signs of any such.
So
You
I
hear the
those
horror
things
story.
where they said, like they're, Guyanese have, some big factor of millions of dollars have been going to Guyanese companies. I mean, is this going to Guyanese companies like Guyanese with, that are spending it in Guyana, or is this going to companies that are nominally Guyanese that, are really, being fronted in some way by Guyanese? I mean, we've seen some questions like that in the past. I mean, do you have a sense of what the
Oh,
actual state
oh,
of play is?
and it's obvious to everybody. I mean, and look, listen to a horror story, which is to me immoral. Do you know? And I'm not making this stuff because it was in the newspapers. I think it was a couple of years ago when Guyanese workers were paid far below the minimum wage, far less than their counterpart workers from other countries. As a matter of fact, there were some Trinidad workers who joined them in a protest. On top of that, this is in the newspapers. In the newspapers, they were having to eat leftover food when everybody had finished eating. The Guyanese were eating leftover food. That was a headline. Gao, I think somehow was wanting to be the union, and Gao was supposed to meet with the minister. Nobody heard anything about coming out of there. Here's what should be discussed at the panel, on one of these panels. They should be talking about why 80%, 80 to 90% of the spending goes to foreign companies. Why most high skilled jobs go to the expatriates. Why local firms struggle to meet qualification standards that seem designed to exclude them. Why foreign companies get waivers for not meeting requirements. So those are but here, and I had this even we had this a challenge in the US, because a lot of, let's say, we are working, in the nuclear weapons complex. Most of those complexes are in a really, disadvantaged area, poor areas, like in the Appalachian of Ohio. And I was responsible for doing contracts. And one of the things that in terms of when you put out the bid, what we used to evaluate contractors on was the key items in those disadvantaged areas is show us how the community we used to set that they have to get at least 50% of all the money spent has to go into those local communities. So that was one of our major criteria. Uh, so a lot of times when they come and use the same excuse, say, well, we can't find qualified people in those local communities. So
Mhm.
guess what we used to do? Because we used to have 50% of the money goes in there, which means you got to hire contractors. Well, in those communities, you do just like Guyana, which is the excuse. So guess what we did? We developed what is called a mentor protege program. So those contractors have to show us a plan, for example, as to how and one of the plan was that you're going to hire them anyway, and we're going to give you 3 years for you to bring them up to, so they're going to be hired on as a subcontract, not doing the exact work, but it's basically like a training program. They come on board, and within 3 years, they're going to be ready for whatever contracts you have in the future. And we held them accountable because their award fees were dependent upon how well they're doing. And we had strict reporting requirements. We set up our own form. So when you just leave it loose with a handshake, there's no enforcement. And that's what we have a loose deal. The government brags about, oh, we've done a local content legislation. It doesn't mean anything. It's just stuff on paper that you brag about. so
Yeah.
so
Actually, to that point, I mean, I've just read, earlier today or yesterday about the coming on stream of you mentioned the question about skills, the coming on stream of the Port Morant. I think the Port Morant,
yep.
to what extent do you think something like that will begin to mitigate some of these? I mean, how long would it take? It's a school, so you have to go in. Yeah, I mean, I prefer the model that you've just described, which is to have a kind of apprenticeship where you're working and learning this thing while you're earning, because it might take you 3 or 4 years to earn a degree. At that time, the opportunity is already gone. So, but your general thoughts on
Well,
the
no, well, not we had a better model than the Portmore. As a matter of fact, our very good friend, Vice Chancellor Ivla Griffith, Ivla, and of course, I was helping him out at Eugene, developing the program for oil and gas,
yeah.
and Ivla and I met with all the principals and from all of the trade schools in Linden, all the technical institutes all over the country. I did not even realize we had so many technical
Of
institutes.
about 17 of them. Yeah.
Yes, we had all of them there at that hotel in Georgetown and Queenstown. And we were going to be putting together a consortium of, so it's not only at Port Moran, but we're going to be putting together consortium. And so every one of these training schools would have their own little niche, but they're going to be working together, and even as a contractor. But so you're learning on the job. But I had already discussed that with the Exxon head, and it was fine. The other thing that I discussed with the Exxon head was to train our people, for them to train them at the Exxon University in Houston, because all these majors, they have their own, what we call, their universities. Like when I worked for BP, we had our university where you specialized ours was in Tulsa. Exxon is in Houston. They had already agreed for them to train our people, and for us to send people to get training, on the job training. Like I told you before, we through Dr. Griffith, we had set up a petroleum engineering department at UG. I don't know what happened to that department, but Terence, if we had gone, we should have been producing skilled people now. A year or two ago, we should have been producing people to do our work, and rather than now, of course, you hear about the Port Moran school. Like I said, I like the concept, but we were going to go much broader, and it could be politics that it was placed in Port Morant, and and the UG thing was put on the back burner, or it was
I'm assuming that the program. I should check to be clear about where the program is at UG, but I would
right,
assume
right.
that they'll be there. But I've also thought. I mean, and it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that. I also think that we're missing an opportunity there, in terms of when we think about the petroleum engineering program at UG, we think about the ancillary skills that would support the broad petroleum sector at the various technical institutes across Guyana. The one place I feel sometimes that we're missing a trick is having a broader sort of like Caribbean strategy. And
Yes.
I know sometimes, folks don't want to think about that, but I do think that, I always think of the example of like Aberdeen in Scotland, where, the folks in Aberdeen essentially became, as a society, kind of a player in the global business of oil and gas from their opportunity in the discovery side of the thing. And I always feel like we're missing an opportunity to have a larger kind of Caribbean focus. There are other technical institutes across the Caribbean. There are lots of, if we thought about like the whole, just in my head, the countries that take the CXC exam, we have a lot of bright young kids all across the region. And if we put all of them together, then we're about 6 million, and then we're like Singapore, rather than we're 800,000 and we're fighting with each other over. But we're building sort of genuine capacity to participate in genuine, oil and gas extraction in a global sense. And it'd be interesting to know what you're thinking of around that, whether that's something that folks should be considering.
No, I agree, and that's exactly where Dr. Griffith was going when he brought in University of Trinidad and Tobago and UWI. I was surprised. I did not even know that University of Trinidad and Tobago had such a powerful petroleum engineering department. When I visited, I was pleasantly amazed. And so, as a matter of fact, Terence, the degree was going to be a joint UWI, UG degree, and a joint UWI, and they were the professors, because we don't have the labs. So
That's
we're
sort of
gonna, for the first year, the students were gonna be going over to Trinidad, and then the Trinidad teachers were gonna be coming over to Guyana until we became matured, and that was a vision. That was really a nice vision of Dr. Griffith, that that it got canceled, of course. But here's the other thing: just as how what we've seen here in this conference, where the agenda is crafted by the majors such as Exxon and them, it's the same thing. They do not like people who they come into your court. They do not want people qualified, or people who were watching over their shoulders, or who could ask them the question. And that was what happened after I left. Everything was canceled because our push was to make sure, like I said, to do exactly what we do in the US, is to make sure we've got as much or more firepower than the contractors. And they accepted that. But then they looked, as soon as I left, and they decided to, we don't have to do that anymore. And the government has allowed it. So it's not a case where Exxon does not understand what is right and what they're required to do in countries such as the United States, because that's what I told them. I said, we will not accept anything less than what you have to abide with in the US. And they said, okay, that's fine with us. But as soon as we left, the standard just dropped, and the government is allowing them to get away, only looking after their interests. Look, tells you and I know, we welcome investment. We welcome investment, but it has to be on fair terms. And these major companies, believe it or not, they want, they're going to go as far as they can get away with. And when you bring it to their attention, they're reasonable companies, and they're going to back off and do what is reasonable. But if you allow them to, they're going to
no,
juke
that's
you,
the issue.
juke out your eyes, and don't
No,
care.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this is in the interest of Guyana. I mean, it is in the interest of Guyana to build, petroleum engineering programs to build regional partnerships and to think about how we might fund them and how to get our young people in them. You know, it is in the interest of Guyana to, build up the, EPA budget, the EPA budget and the EPA staff and the EPA staff capacity to do the job as officers of the EPA. So, I mean, to the thing in Port Morat, it is in the interest of Guyana to, have some certification standards for Guyanese oil workers and to be competitive in a global sense.
Yep.
And so, I think you're right. I mean, you should probably have a full. I mean, as I'm listening to you now, I'm thinking, if we're really doing a conference like that, I mean, if I'm organizing a conference at the university around some of these issues, I would spend an entire day
Yep.
talking about, like building out our technical capacity and what the plan would be for building out our technical capacity. So, yeah, that's absolutely. Again, I mean, I somehow it's interesting to me that somehow, why doesn't this happen? What is the quality of the conversation that we're having, that like something that is so obvious is not on the agenda, or is not the thing that is driving the agenda?
Well, it's very simple. It's very simple. Like I said, there was a difference when people like myself were there, and now it's totally where Exxon understood and were reasonable enough to accept. Okay, this is where we've got to, we've got to give to in the interest of the country of Guyana. But now things have shifted in the opposite direction, where Exxon is controlling everything, that they're doing everything as cheaply as possible so that they can have their maximum profits, while at the same time, whether it's environmental and or revenues on the contract renegotiations and everything, all of that has been canceled.
Yeah,
So
but
that is what it is.
I would say, not in defense of Exxon. I would say, well, look, that's their job. They're
Oh, but no, I here,
corporation. They
Terence,
have
I always say that.
it's your responsibility as shareholders. So
I always say that. I said here, I never, I
prevents us from exercising
absolutely.
Yeah.
I've always said that. I've never been mad at Exxon. Exxon is doing what they're supposed to be doing, is to make a bigger bottom line as possible. However, we are not performing our responsibility to make in the best interest of our people. And that should be where we should be focused.
Yeah,
We can't vex with Exxon. That's exactly what's going on. And like I said,
and if we're hosting the conference, then we should set the agenda.
Absolutely.
And that agenda should carry the things that are of importance, for our fiduciary interests. We're stewards of the interests of the people of Guyana, and so we need to put their interests there and have there be a discussion. But it just strikes me that it just strikes me that as you speak, it struck me that these are not difficult things to do, and people have done them all across, and we ought to really insist that that these things get done in a much more effective fashion in the interest of Guyana over the long term. It's always such a pleasure chatting with you. And I'm looking up at the clock and realize that we've already blown through.
I know.
Blown through the hour. I think, so maybe just to sum up, I think it's clear that you've made clear that look, this conference is missing some serious discussion of environmental oversight, local content, questions about technical capacity and real training to participate in a meaningful way in that. And I suppose we're right up. I mean, we're right up against. I wanted to ask you one more thing. So if you would extend for just a couple more minutes, I wanted to ask you about the extent to which something like the National Resource Fund is a part of this conference agenda and the way in which that's being managed, and ask what your thoughts are in that regard.
Well, the Natural Resource Fund, of course, it's a biggie, because that's where you see your revenues. And there's no transparency. It's just listen, and I've got to admit here, Terrence, I probably shouldn't have done it on the show. I'm not a big fan of an early, what is that? Yeah, an early natural resource fund. I look at it as your household, how you manage your household. You're not gonna go invest if your family doesn't have food on the table, you can't pay your rent. You invest what is extra. So now the money is coming in. I think we shouldn't be, hell, we've got like 58% of the people um, without food, shelter, and everything else. Education, we should be investing now today because the best investment, and I understand because there are three major roles or purpose of this resource fund, which is for emergencies and for really, really critical needs. That's one. Of course, to stabilize to stabilize our economy just in case oil prices go, and of course for future generation. But my argument has always been, Terence, that the best investment that you can make for the future generation is to invest in them today, in education, for example, because education is the number one driver of foreign direct investment. It's the old paradigm used to be infrastructure. That's not it anymore. It's education, 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 which is the new paradigm, and that's where we should be investing. And that's where we talked a lot of it on the periphery here about building capacity. But and here, we talk about the Norway model. Everybody, do you know? But here are the facts about the Norway model, and a lot of people, you hear even the administration. Well, we're following everything in Norway. Do you know when the Norway law was passed, 21 years after oil was discovered? Do you know when was the forced withdrawal from that fund? 47 years, Terence, after forced oil in Norway. Do you know what Norway did with that money before they start investing, which is my model, which is to make sure that you become a rich force, invest in your people, and now your extra that you're getting, that's what you invest. Norway has $2 trillion, 2 trillion when I last checked in that fund. But Norway did not withdraw a single dime until 2016, which was 47 years after oil. They did not legislate sovereign wealth fund until 21 years after forced oil. So I know we use this Norway thing as a model, but I love the Norway model for that reason, that they did not go out there and spend the money initially. So here, when going back a little, here's what's interesting, Terence. That so when I was raising this argument going way back years, the minister responsible for it, you know what? You know what was the counter argument? Well, if we keep the money and not put in the sovereign wealth fund, there's going to be massive corruption. People are going to thief them. I mean, I'm not making this stuff. It's going to be people are going to take the money out of the out of the general fund. That was the reason. Could you imagine we making policies because we're afraid of people being corrupt? But the sovereign fund, I'm all for it, except I want to look at the emergency part and the critical needs, such as investing in education today, because that's the future of tomorrow. Because when all is gone, Terence, when all is gone, we're going to have to attract foreign direct investment. And what attracts them is a sound education system.
Yeah, there are quite a few questions for you. I just want to, I know you might find this one interesting. So this one is from Cosworth Roberts, and so that it's a kind of take on ways in which you might heal some of this divide that I think we can both agree. The ethnic divide, the racial divides, the class divides, these things are really kind of making it difficult for us to come together in some kind of cohesive way, which would help us to drive Guyana forward. And then, that's a general comment about the vision, and then, you know, some mechanism. Do you think that appointing commissions composed of professionals, citizen, not in some technical thing,
Yeah.
to
Yep.
administer certain sectors might somehow mitigate the effects of the the sort of divisive quality of the society?
Well, I've always said, and not only me. I remember going way back, and I can't remember which ambassador to the U.S. it was. Very simply said that it doesn't matter how wealthy we get, Guyana will not realize its real wealth unless we unify. As a matter of fact, unless we get the racists together, because you can't get away from it. Don't.
Yeah, I mean, could that have been something that was part of this conference agenda? A real serious attempt.
Absolutely, you cannot. Because when the PPP leader is in power, the PNC people, and it's always about 50-50. 50% are not going to trust your support. You're any other one in power. So we could never, they were never going to be unity until we decide to heal that. And this conference is showing here there's no intention of healing when you do not invite a single member of the opposition to the most important sector that you're showcasing to the world. That's telling me there is no unity that you're interested in.
Yeah,
Now, the other part, what was the other piece of the question? What was the other question? There was another
about
one.
the mechanism. So, like
yes,
so
this
maybe
is
how we
important.
go about,
This because I know that there is a call for this commission. And by the way, President Granger had asked me to give him a framework as to how to manage our sector. And one of the most important things that was on that chart was, which is again the U.S. model, was to have what we call an inspector general's office. And if you notice, the PNC 20-point plan for oil and gas had that as one of the thing that they were going to do, is to have an inspector general office, which is independent of each of these agencies. However, again, I don't care what commission and everything that you're doing. It has to be independent of the government. It has to be some civic society that are appointing these people, and they're held accountable, not the government per se, because we know what happens when the government is appointing you. They're going to appoint their people, and I don't care what commission you got, what you call it, it will never satisfy the intent of what it was set up for. But I'm all for this inspector general office that would root out, you talk about rooting out corruption, because these are people where, with a 24/7 hotline, they had authority to investigate and to file charges and everything. They're independent. And heck, when I worked in government, we weren't even taking like a soda from a contractor, because we were afraid that somebody is going to see and call in on that hotline, and the next thing you know, you've got 12 inspector generals investigating you, and it's serious trouble if that is the case. So no, this whole but I agree that there should be. And by the way, this here was part of the PNC also, their 20-point plan. It's the people should be technically qualified to be on these type of technical committee, not politicians, but they have to have independent thinking and accountable to an independent organization.
Dr. Adams, I want to thank you for another sort of extraordinary and substantive conversation. And I think I'm going to try to summarize what I think we've said. So I think it's clear the 2026 conference is really a commercial and promotional event, and it's not a policy development forum. That I think is clear. I think this theme, building tomorrow's future today, is broadly aspirational rhetoric. There are no operational specifics that emerge from that. Certainly the business model of the conference is, you can't say that it's corrupt, but there's subtle real constraints on the content that emerges from the conference. And then there's, as we've just been describing, there are critical content that is missing from the agenda. And more broadly, as you see it, I think we need some institutional reform, regulatory capacity, transparency, uh, mechanisms, independent oversight. Uh, Civil society should be a part of this conversation in a structured way. And certainly one aspect of that has to be, you know, and should be, and as we think about it now, it really should be, you know, an ongoing thought about what the optimal model for Guyana to manage its oil wealth ought to be. So I think I've captured that fairly. I hope I've captured that fairly. So you know, sort of final thoughts.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think you've covered it. It's to get the most important thing to me is strong institutions to govern which the most important thing. And the other thing is to this conference is supposed to be sharing knowledge and information to inform the decision making of the nation, and all the decision makers in parliament, the opposition, which is part of the constitution as government, should have been part of here. And before, here's another a big elephant in the room here, Terence, that people ought to be aware of: the decommissioning, which means after all this stuff is done, they need to clean up the environment to its original state or to a reasonable state, clean it. What has been happening, and this here is very new because even throughout the world, the technology is now being developed to clean up the environment. So what is happening now, or what may happen to start with, Exxon, we're paying Exxon billions of dollars in front before they even start, before from the time we sign the authorization for them to go ahead. It might take 2 more years before they start oil. They are already collecting billions for those projects without even the project is ready for cleanup or decommission, because they're going to leave everything on the sea floor. But what has been happening, what we see now in oil fields all over the world, in Texas especially, these wells, even when you plug them, they start leaking again, and people have been taking them to court. And what some of the majors are doing, like offshore California, when they're getting close to the end of life of that field, they're selling it off to these small companies that have no assets. So here's what we're facing with this whole decommissioning thing. When they're packed up and gone and they said that they clean up, there is no coming back for us when those oil wells is leaking at the bottom of the ocean. Okay, and who knows how well they're gonna plug it, because who's going to certify it? We don't have the technical expertise. They pack up and leave, and maybe the day after something happens, those wells blow. We got oil all over the place coming from the bottom of the ocean. There is no guardrails against that. That is the big elephant in the room that we are not paying attention to, and that should be part of the conference in terms of what technologies are being developed, and what kind of what resources do we need to start developing our plan for it.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think from the Guyana Business Journal perspectives, I mean, we'll track this conference, and we'll try to provide a 6 month, maybe a 1 year follow up to see what has been communicated, and to what extent the things that have been communicated have been actually implemented. And maybe one of the things I'm thinking as you speak is a kind of some sort of energy governance scorecard where we look at how well things are being done in various categories, and we kind of give some grades to that. Maybe one thing I'll say to folks, if they who might be listening, if you're attending the conference, ask some hard questions.
Yep.
And don't let the sort of uncomfortable silence shut down the topics, right? It's always important when you're participating in something, not just to go along to get along, but to ask the questions, and engage your parliamentary representatives. They they have a role and to determine. I mean, maybe you need to encourage them to go to the conference, even though they have not been formally invited or given a place to speak. But maybe hopefully after this, someone will say, that every parliamentary representative
Yep.
should be welcomed and have a place at this conference without having to shell out $400 or 500 US or whatever the cost of attending the conference is. And then maybe that's not it. I mean, look, the conference will happen tomorrow, with or without our critique, and it will have the impressive speakers and the expensive booths and the networking receptions and so on. And I think what we are trying to do is to insist that this spectacle doesn't replace the substance, and there are genuine issues that are of importance to Guyana, and we're trying to ensure that those things get on the agenda and move beyond the sort of partisan logic of, is it APNU or is it WIN or is it PPP or is it, and to recognize that none of these entities are all subsets of Guyana. And if Guyana survives, these entities will survive, but these entities can survive and Guyana not survive in some very real way. And so part of what we're doing is, speaking in the national interest rather than in the partisan political interest. So, again, Dr. Adams, thank you for your time, your expertise, and always your courage to speak plainly. And it's I'll try to share a recording, and I hope folks will share it. And I wanted to say thanks, and then I also wanted to do one last thing. So we have, second kind of area of second kind of someone who's doing some work that we admire and doing it really well. And these folks are out of Georgia, and I just wanted to again thank them for helping to support us in this. And so let me introduce them to you.
Caribbean International Shipping Services is your reliable and trustworthy solution for all your international shipping needs. With over 30 years of logistics experience, we offer weekly shipping services by ocean and air from the Southeast USA to over 20 destinations in the Caribbean, South and Central American. We specialize in shipping household and commercial goods. We offer full container relocation services. Don't have time to travel then? Order your products online, we repack and ship. We sell barrels, boxes, offer packaging and crating services. Get on board and ship stress-free now. Contact our team today at 770-323-1111.
Yeah, so I want to encourage you to get on board with Caribbean International Shipping and ship things stress-free to Guyana. And that's a really good company, and they've been doing that for many, many years. And they've seen it fit to support critical conversations like the ones that we're having without insisting that we be subtly pressured not to speak in one direction or another. So, I'm Terrence Blackman, publisher of the Guyana Business Journal, and until the next time, let's stay informed, let's stay critical, and stay engaged. So, good night.
Good night. Thanks, Terran. Thanks to the audience.
Till end the stream. Give me a moment.